Have you ever read a line of dialogue in a book and you've just immediately thrown it across the room? I've done that. There are plenty of groan-inducing dialogue lines where I'm like, I just can't continue with this book. So writers, in this video, I'm not only going to teach you how to identify those terrible lines of dialogue so you make sure you guard against doing it yourself, I'm also going to teach you how to write better lines of dialogue that make readers fall in love with your book. We are going to start at number 10 and then work all the way up to number 1. And I know some of you are guessing what number 1 is already, and maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong, you'll just have to wait and see. Let's start with number 10, the Department of Redundancy Department. Just marvel at this marvelous example of marvelous redundancy. This is from Stephanie Meyer in New Moon. Arrow started to laugh. Ha ha ha, he chuckled. Wow, let's see it 3 times to make sure everybody gets it. Oh, is he laughing? I think so. So you can use any one of these 3 elements, right? You could say, Arrow started to laugh, and just leave it right there, right? That'll communicate it. Or you can actually have us hear the sound of him laughing, ha ha ha, like that works too if you just want to have it on its own. Or you can just say, he chuckled. You can do any one of those, but you cannot do all 3 of them. Now I picked this because doing 3 in a row is pretty rare. Most of the time I see this as an ender, it's usually 2. So a character will say something like, I'd just love to be shot in the face with a shotgun, she said sarcastically. Yeah, I think people are gonna get the sarcasm without you like giving stage directions on how she's saying it. All right, let's move on to number 9, which is melodrama. So I can't resist slipping in some examples from films in this video, although, you know, we're going to do a lot of books too, but this was too good. I couldn't pass it up. The Star Wars prequels have been savaged, and, you know, rightfully so, for their atrocious lines of dialogue. Some of the absolute worst groan-inducing ones come from Anakin and Padme.
I'm haunted by the kiss that you should never have given me. My heart is beating, hoping that that kiss will not become a scar.
So normally Anakin speaks normally, but suddenly when he starts talking to Padme, it becomes this weird affectation, like almost Shakespearean form of speaking. It's over the top. It's super cringe. And honestly, you can feel the author sort of hovering over the scene, pulling the strings of the marionette. So how can you make the character sound more like themselves rather than more like you? Rather than having them say what the author needs them to say or what the author thinks they should say, your goal is to figure out for a human being in this particular circumstance, what seems realistic that they actually would say. You need to go for plausibility. You need to make them seem like a real human being. And hey, for all you writers who want to make a mark on the world, join Bookfox Lab, which is my coaching program. It gives you lots of one-on-one attention on you and on your work, and also a really wonderful community of writers too. I'll put the link in the description so you can check it out. Now let's move on to the next terrible form of dialogue. It is number 8, naked dialogue. So naked dialogue is dialogue that says exactly what the author believes about this character, not even what the character believes about themselves. And for this one, we're gonna look at Jughead Jones in Riverdale. He says,
I'm weird. I'm a weirdo. I don't fit in, and I don't want to fit in. Have you ever seen me without this stupid hat on? That's weird.
Most of the time, people don't give like a neat summary of who they are as people inside dialogue. That just doesn't happen. So this dialogue comes off as unintentionally overwrought and over the top. Instead of telling us who this character is, instead, you want to show us who this character is. You want to make this character show us that they're being weird rather than being like, I'm weird. Now, if you really want to show some introspection, like show them trying to process or come to grips with who they are, there are far better ways to do it than dialogue. For instance, you could do it in their thoughts, or you could do it out loud, but perhaps they get it wrong about themselves. Ted Talley, who was the screenwriter for The Silence of the Lambs, said, what's important is not the emotion that they're playing, but the emotion they're trying to conceal. A lot of the trouble with the dialogue that I'm showing you is that there's only one level. It's just the basic level of communication, like I'm gonna give you information. And there's not that underlying level of, all right, what am I trying to prevent you from knowing about me? How am I being dishonest when I'm speaking? Now for the next point, I think most of you probably suspected that this guy would appear somewhere in this video. Let's look at number 7, Dialect gone wrong. So we're gonna look at Dan Brown's Inferno, and honestly, it was tough to pick only one example from Dan Brown. He is just a repository of wonderful errors on pretty much every single level, but a lot of dialogue ones. So take a look at this example, and honestly, I'm not gonna read it because I'm not sure what accent to use. This is supposedly someone from Eastern Europe, but then I read it and I'm like, is this an Asian accent? I don't know. It's a horribly botched, mangled excuse of dialect that is attempting to represent a human being, but I just don't believe it. So first of all, just remember that when you're writing dialect, a little misspelling goes a long way. So there's not like too much here. We have the E's instead of is. Okay, that's all right. But if you tilt a little bit further in and you write a lot more misspellings, it just gets really difficult to read. Second, just make sure you have the right mistakes for the particular dialect that you're representing. Are they dropping out verbs? Are they forgetting articles of speech? Are they inverting adjectives? Like every single language has a particular way in which they will understand the English language. So you can't just throw a whole bunch of mistakes in there and hope that that's actually represents someone speaking. That's not how it works. I should also add that it's partially expositional. Like the character who she's speaking to already knows that it's a bad phone number and bad visa and all that. So she's telling her information she already knows. And hey, I've spent the last 15 years helping writers write better fiction. If you want all that experience sort of condensed down into 15-minute videos, make sure you subscribe and you like this video. Okay, let's move on to the next mistake, which is number 6. Absurd Swerves. For this example, we're going to look at a marvelously bad piece of dialogue from Tommy Wiseau. And some of you know who he is. He wrote The Room, which is sort of this cult classic movie, which is renowned for being the worst movie ever made. So he utters this just treasure box of a horrible line of dialogue.
I did not hit her. It's not true. It's bullshit. I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Mark.
So it is almost impossible for me to believe that a human being wrote this. Like if I tried to write the worst line of dialogue possible, I don't think I could come up with something this bad. So it's kind of genius level idiocy. So first of all, why is this so bad? I mean, he's having a conversation with himself sort of out loud. That doesn't make much sense. Second, there's redundancy, and it's not the good type of redundancy. He basically says the same thing 3 times in a row. Third is you get this really abrupt, weird transition where he's like really, really serious, really, really concentrating, and then like flippant like, oh, hi, Mark. And then lastly, it's just an issue of believability. Like he would have noticed Mark a long time beforehand. So if you want a real challenge, and I'm talking about like a real dialogue challenge, I'm gonna give one to you. Try rewriting this line of dialogue, but make it good. Now, you can stop the video and attempt to do this on your own. I'll help you out a little bit maybe by talking about how I would rewrite this to make it better. For starters, he wouldn't be talking to himself. This would be an actual conversation with Mark. Next, he would try to be convincing Mark that he wasn't the one to do it, but the subtext is the reader and the listener and Mark, we're sort of doubting whether he's telling the truth. Maybe he says like, I could have hit her and I wanted to hit her, but I didn't do it. And then Mark would respond like agreeing that he didn't do it, but saying in a way that makes the listener or the reader think like, I'm not sure Mark believes him. So you could say, yeah, I believe you. Sure, man. So with dialogue like that, you get a lot more subtext. They're saying the opposite of what they actually believe. And suddenly these characters seem real rather than just cardboard cutouts on the screen. This next one is one of my favorite mistakes. It is number 5. Forced backstory. So a lot of the examples we've looked at so far are sort of renowned bad movies or books, and you're like, of course they wrote bad dialogue. Okay, let's look at like what's supposed to be a really good novel, a literary novel written by a literary author, Sunset Park by Paul Auster. And I do this to let you know, like, hey, even really great authors sometimes make cringeworthy mistakes. So check out this example from a wife to her husband, just basically having him reminisce about like all the times he had him play baseball with their son. I'd just like to ask you this question. Who is this dialogue for? This isn't for the character she's talking to because, I mean, he knows it all already. This is for the audience because Paul Auster is trying to tell us like, oh, they had this past together where they used to play baseball. They were really chummy. Unfortunately, there are much better ways to go into backstory than trying to communicate it baldly through dialogue, like, as you know, Bob, and then saying whatever it is that they already know. As you know, Morris, you used to be close. You used to teach him baseball. I think a much better strategy if you were trying to make this work work in your own novel would just be to have the character who's speaking offer a single line of dialogue to get them reminiscing. Like, remember how much time you spent in the park teaching them baseball? And then go into the character's thoughts and show them like remembering, oh, here's all the time that we did baseball and like how that went and maybe a particular memory. That way the dialogue works as a spark, leading the character to reminisce about all this baseball, rather than the dialogue doing all the heavy lifting of like, here's the actual stuff that happened in the past. You're gonna like this next terrible example of dialogue. It is number 4, getting a little lectury. So there's nothing wrong with a little grandstanding from your characters. Get them up on a soapbox, have them say exactly what they think. Nothing wrong with it. But a speech that goes on for 75 pages, that's a little bit much, Ayn Rand. Atlas shrugged, a little much. So in John Galt's 75-page speech in Atlas Shrugged, first of all, it's not even dialogue, right? There's not even any back and forth. It's just monologuing for really, really long. Second, the character becomes kind of a mouthpiece rather than a human being. So John Galt is just advocating for Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism. So you want to make sure there's some sort of differences between your character as a human being and you as the author. So what do you do instead, right? Say you have a lot of ideas, you want to put them inside your book. How do you pull that off? To answer that, I'm going to refer back to an interview I did once with Nathan Englander. He is a great short story writer. For the Relief of Unbearable Urges is probably his most famous book, but he has several great novels as well. I interviewed him and he said what he does is he'll take a couple of pages and just write out what his character really thinks about a topic. Just gush onto the page. And then what he'll do is he'll condense it down. Sometimes it condenses down to a single line. Sometimes it condenses down to, say, a paragraph or so. He says that is the process you have to go to figure out what your character needs to say. You really have to spill all the beans and then figure out like, okay, like what is absolutely essential for this book? What's the most important thing they have to communicate, and shorten it so the reader isn't slogging through, say, 75 pages of a speech. All right, now it's time for the top 3. We only have 3 left, and this number 3rd one is a doozy. It is robotic dialogue. Imagine trying to predict in a book as you're reading what the next line of dialogue will be. For most books, it's pretty tough to do, right? You don't know whether the next character is going to be sarcastic in response, or whether they're going to be witty or crack a joke or crack a pun. And that's good, right? It's good you can't predict what's going to happen because it's an element of surprise and it keeps the reader from getting bored. Now, imagine that you are reading The Celestian Prophecy by James Redfield. Most lines of dialogue in this book, I think you could actually predict what the character is going to say back, because it's the most bland, vanilla-ish, expected, predictable response you could possibly imagine. And honestly, I think line by line, this book wins the cake for having the absolute worst dialogue. And that's saying something because there are some real contenders in this video. So just look at this back and forth dialogue. It's certainly lovely, isn't it? It certainly is. I've never seen anything quite like it. Is this your first visit here? Yes, it is. I don't know much about the place. Oh, really? You don't know much about this place because it's your first time here. What do you know? You're a scientist then. I teach physics at a small college in Maine. It goes on like this for pages. But what I think is really useful for writers is actually naming what is the specific problem here. I think the problem here is that the dialogue is focused nearly entirely upon information delivery. This is viewing dialogue as sort of a UPS for your plot. It just delivers the packages of information to the reader. And there's nothing on stuff like, I don't know, characterization. This character is saying stuff, it should tell us something about who they are as a person. Or the dialogue also doesn't have any playfulness or any sense of surprise. Have someone crack a joke, have someone say something unexpected, have someone change the topic. You don't always have to be so earnest. Now, aside from the bad content, it's also fairly clunky just in terms of rhythm. Most lines of dialogue feel robotic, as if they were manufactured in a lab, rather than having sort of this swoop and swerve of actual language. So what are the best ways to solve this? Okay, I will give you 2. 1, listen to actual conversations and transcribe them and get a feel for how language appears in the real world and then appears on the page. And then 2, read your dialogue out loud. Like, listen to you reading it. Does it sound real or does it sound a little forced and clunky and artificial? All right, we're all the way up to number 2. This one's a doozy. It is Just Too Punny. So for this one, we're going to go back to some old school Batman and Robin movies with Mr. Freeze. This contains maybe some of the worst puns ever written. Allow me to break the ice. My name is Freeze. Learn it well, for it is the chilling sound of your doom. What killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age.
Let's kick some ice. Tonight's forecast, a freeze is coming.
So now I have to say, like, puns alone aren't necessarily bad, but also like a few puns go a really long way. But here's the real trouble. All the puns are themed around his abilities and his name. It's just a little bit too on the nose. Now, if you really want to do puns well, I would recommend reading Terry Pratchett, especially anything in the Discworld series. For example, McGrath says a broomstick is one of them sexual metaphor thingies. And then the footnote says, although this is a fallacy. Fallacy, phallus, Or take this one. It's a guy who wears a lot of very shiny gold armor, but he feels like a class traitor when he wears it. And then he says it was guilt by association. Guilt and guilt as in golden. So look, in general, just don't go overboard on the puns and you'll probably avoid this error. And lastly, it's time for number one. Y'all have been waiting for this. What am I gonna choose? It's a good one. It's a doozy. Let's look at it. It is diction level change-ups. So most of the time you want your character to speak at one diction level, meaning if they're very well educated with a couple master's degrees, they're gonna use higher level words than somebody off the streets who's just spitballing and using casual colloquial language. Enter 50 Shades of Grey by E.L. James. So what's really interesting about this writing is we get two completely different diction levels from supposedly the same character. So she uses words like somnambulant, referring to her head. She uses words like avuncular. She uses words like gauche, and phrases like primal carnal rhythm. But then how does that compare to her actual dialogue, the words that come out of her mouth? Well, she uses G's 81 times in such marvelous constructions as geez, he looks so freaking hot. Crap appears 92 times. Oh my appears 50 times. Holy cow appears 19 times. So what it feels like is that E.L. James went on full-on thesaurus abuse whenever the character was, thinking in her head. But what actually comes out her mouth is very, very low diction level. That's not a person. That is a construct by the author. Along the same line of diction levels, my axe to grind is whenever I see a character with a PhD in a movie, I just know they're going to speak like an average human being. Listen, I taught college for a decade. I was around plenty of people with PhDs. And when you get them on their particular subject level, their dialogue and their diction level, it spikes immediately. But perhaps the worst example of all would be Morbius, where a Nobel Prize nominated scientist with a PhD, played by Jared Leto, says, it's lethal to bats, but deadly to humans. Are you telling me someone with a PhD doesn't understand that lethal and deadly are the same thing? Not sure I believe it. Hey, just a reminder to click on the link below and check out BookFox Lab, see if we can help you along this writing journey. And I hope all these mistakes made you feel like, I'm not that bad of a writer after all. I hope it was encouraging in the end, and also you have some good takeaways for how you can improve your dialogue. Happy writing.